Thanks very much for coming today, and we have, especially over the last month, 6 weeks, I've been making quite a bit of John Hickenlooper's failed record on public safety. Today in our debate, John pushed back again somehow, thinking that public safety wasn't a legitimate topic of discussion. I think quite the opposite. I think people have every reason to be concerned about the safety in our neighborhoods, and when they've read published reports that in 1 year's time, 110 parolees were let out of solitary confinement directly onto our streets, they have a right to be concerned. And when they see that 93% of sex offenders that are released from our state prisons, and we're talking about 1,000 or more per year being released from our state prisons, have no rehabilitation, no therapy before they're released, and then understand that Colorado suffers with a 50% recidivism rate, they've got a right to be concerned. And now today we learn, we learned through press reports that the Hickenlooper administration at least was considering. We can't get an answer from them whether or not they've actually implemented this policy. But way back, I think it was in March, they wrote a 2-page memo about providing leisure time to death row inmates. That would be Sir Mario Owens, Robert Ray, and of course Nathan Dunlap. The proposal was to allow them 4 hours a day of unsupervised leisure time, and this was out of consideration for having behaved so well while they were in prison. No mention of the crimes they had committed or the sentences that they had been sentenced to. I'm joined today by some people that have great concern and frankly great experience in the area of public safety, and I'd like to first call upon Pete Weir to speak on this subject. Pete, of course, is the district attorney in Jefferson County. Pete? Oh, other way. There you are. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Bob. Good afternoon. I'd like to start just by way of introduction. I've had the privilege of spending over 35 years in the criminal justice system dedicated to public safety. I had the privilege of being appointed by a Republican governor, Bill Owens, to the district court bench in Jefferson County, and I served as a district court judge for about 2.5 years until a Democrat governor, Bill Ritter, asked me to leave the bench to assume the responsibilities as the executive director of the Colorado Department of Public Safety. And I did that. And in that capacity, I helped create and initiate the Colorado Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice, and I was privileged to serve as its first chairman for about 3.5 years. My career has been dedicated to public safety, and I am here today because this issue is so vitally important to our state. And I'm here today to give my strongest possible support to Bob Beauprez, because we need a governor that starts to care about public safety. The last 4 years, I can say without hesitation or equivocation, have been the most offender-friendly years of my entire career. The policies, practices, and legislation that we have seen coming under this administration are focused on the offender. Taking a back seat are our citizens, the victims, the survivors of crime. Taking a back seat has been law enforcement, and taking a back seat has been those people that represent the people of the state of Colorado, the prosecutors of this state. We know the story of Nathan Dunlap. We know the story of, frankly, disregarding the 12 men and women that came off the streets and sat for months to listen to that testimony and arrive at a difficult decision. We know the story of a governor that ignored that and ignored 19 years of appellate jurisprudence. Justice needs to be done for Nathan Dunlap. We have a governor that has presided over policies that have reduced the penalties for drug dealers. People that are giving drugs to our kids, what are otherwise called special offenders, those laws have been weakened significantly. We have a governor that has presided over policies and endorsed legislative initiatives that makes it much more difficult for prosecutors to effectively deal with juveniles who commit adult crimes. It's a governor that doesn't understand the proactive efforts that are taken on behalf of kids and the prevention programs that are in place. It's a governor that ties our hands when we are actively working to try to intervene appropriately in a young kid's life. We have a governor whose detention policies are such that over half of the individuals that are released from prison are classified pursuant to their own Division of Criminal Justice as either high risk or very high risk. They're released to our community in the form of community corrections or halfway houses. But the statistics and data show that 60 to 70% of those high risk and very high risk offenders fail. That is a danger to our community. We have a governor that has not stepped forward to assist my colleagues, particularly in the rural areas. The disparity between funding of those individuals that represent defendants, and goodness knows they are entitled to and should have effective and good representation. But we have prosecutors' offices, primarily in the rural part of this state, that do not have enough prosecutors to do the job. They are outnumbered by the defense bar. The governor has not stepped forward to correct that problem, to work cooperatively with counties to address that problem. We have a governor, frankly, who views the judicial selection process so poorly that it is rare that he personally meets with applicants and candidates for county court and district court positions. It's my view, having gone through the process and having the privilege of serving as a judge, that being a judge and being appointed as a judge is perhaps the strongest legacy that a governor can leave. John Hickenlooper, as a matter of practice, has deferred that to a committee. That's not what Beauprez will do. We need a governor that understands public safety, understands survivors of crime, understands law enforcement, and understands the prosecution community. The reason I'm here today is we have not had such a governor for 4 years. But God willing, with Bob Beauprez being elected, we will have one as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Another fighter of crime and defender of all of us citizens in Colorado is the Arapahoe County DA. Let me call on George Brauchler to say a few words. George? Thank you, sir. Thank you.
It's hard to follow Pete, so eloquent and has a much more distinguished resume than I have. I think all I bring to the table is I'm a district attorney for a very diverse, large portion of this state. I'd say about somewhere along the line of 940,000 people, Coloradans, live in our jurisdiction. It's almost 1 in 5. But I'm also a father of 4 and a husband to 1 incredible woman. And we count on government, whether it's the part that I help manage or the ones that we rely upon, the men and women with badges, the judges behind the bench, or even the governor and the legislature who help pass the laws and see that they're enforced. We rely upon them for our safety and our well-being. Here's what gets me about what we've seen over the last 4 years and what I know has affected us over the last 2. And it's not just at the state level, but you can feel it here almost more than anywhere. And that is the idea that the rule of law is dying. It's the idea that the laws on our books, whether they be in our Colorado Constitution or in our statutes, that they are somehow expired commitments to values we no longer hold dear, and that the person that assumes the mantle of the governorship is able to substitute his own views on what justice is, his own views on what the appropriate laws are, for what Coloradoans have dictated the laws will be. And that's what we saw with Nathan Dunlap. We saw a governor who campaigned on being in favor of Colorado's death penalty, then decide, I've changed my mind. I'm feeling a little squeamish about it, and refusing to enforce it. But at the same time, refusing to take a position of granting even clemency to provide those poor victims some closure after 20 years of this living nightmare. And then he has the gall to stand before Colorado and say that was a gutsy leadership move, and it was not. This is a governor now who has taken to the podium several times against Bob Beauprez to announce he has no plans to change his mind on Nathan Dunlap, that he will allow this reprieve, this power that hasn't been exercised since 1895. He's going to keep that in place if he's reelected. And yet goes behind the scenes, off camera, with a crew from CNN and suggests that he has something else in mind if he were to lose this election. And that's despicable. Bob Beauprez will stand here and tell you, these are my values, this is what I believe in, this is what I'm going to do as governor, and you can count on that. We have already lived through 4 years of a governor who will say one thing, do another, and then promise someone else yet a third thing. And that's got to change. Public safety matters. It is a blind spot for this governor. It is a blind spot when those trial judges who are going to sit and protect the rights of victims, protect the rights, frankly, of the defendants, see that our laws are executed and put sentences upon people that we expect them to put on them to protect us. He doesn't even meet with them before he has someone that we've never voted for and we don't know appoint them to the bench. That's weak. That's real weakness. Over the 4 years that we have had Governor Hickenlooper, I want you to point to the law that you think has made us safer. I want you to point to the campaign that the governor has put his name and his political will and credibility behind that has made us stronger. Is it the legalization of marijuana? Is it the fact that we remain one of 4 states in the country who don't have a felony DUI law, that we still have a law in place that says whether it's your 20th DUI or your first, the sentence you face is the same? That's ridiculous. We need a governor who will lead, not a governor who shrugs and says, what has my party passed in the legislature and put upon my desk for my signature? We need a governor who will step forward and say, this is how I value public safety, and act on it. We need a Governor Bob Beauprez. We know what Governor Hickenlooper's priorities are. It's to allow a DOC to release those who should be unreleasable into our public. It's to focus on how death row inmates don't have enough leisure time. It's to suspend enforcement of a law that we count on to punish the worst of the worst. Governor Beauprez won't make any of those his priority. Now I wonder if before the 4th of November, Governor Hickenlooper will step forward and disabuse us of these conclusions we have naturally drawn from his ongoing conduct on these things. But my best guess is he won't. My guess is no one from his office will. And my guess is we won't hear a single thing about the true nature of his plans or commitment to public safety until November the 5th. But you have ballots now, and those ballots need to be cast for a better tomorrow and a safer tomorrow for Colorado. Those ballots need to be cast for Bob Beauprez. Thank you.
Thank you, George. We've been trying to find out all day long on this story about 4 hours of unsupervised leisure time, whether or not the policy's actually been implemented. So far, the governor's office, as far as I know, remains absolutely silent. And I think that speaks volumes as to why they don't want to talk about public safety and their policies. Somebody who shares my passion, my commitment to public safety is my running mate, Joe Repella. She not only happens to be, I hope, Colorado's next lieutenant governor and a strong, principled person in her own right, she is also a single mother. I think she brings a needed and a most important perspective to this. Let me ask Jill Repella to come up and say a few words as well. Jill?
As a commissioner in Douglas County, I will tell you that the one most important thing that we know as commissioners that's important in our communities is public safety. Without public safety, it's very difficult to grow your economy. Without good public safety, it's very difficult to educate a child. Without public safety, it's very difficult for a mother to take her children to the park and feel comfortable and enjoy their quality of life. That is at the foundation of everything in our communities. It's been appalling watching many of these policies roll out in the last 4 years that jeopardizes our public safety. We are fortunate in Douglas County, our crime rate is low. But unfortunately, in other communities, the crime rate is not low. I had a woman approach me at one of our campaign events. I didn't know the woman. It was unsolicited. We weren't even talking about public safety. But she pulled me aside to share her story with me. And her story goes like this. Her ex-husband is in jail for attempted murder. She didn't tell me if she was the victim of that or not, and I didn't ask. I was respectful. She told me through the parole process, unfortunately, because she didn't want to testify and have her ex-husband know she was testifying, not wanting to get parole, they recommended that she write a letter. Somehow through that process, the letter got back to him. And then she had threats in her life after that. I will tell you, here and now, we talk a lot about this war on women, but we don't talk about the issues that matter most to women. We need to stop talking about the single issue, and we need to start talking about public safety. That affects women on a daily basis. That affects our children on a daily basis. We need to look at the crime statistics. We need to look at what we're doing in Colorado as it relates to marijuana use. We need to engage in dialogue with law enforcement on the usage of marijuana. I have asked many law enforcement officers as well as sheriffs, have they been engaged in the dialogue? No, they have not at a meaningful level. Why would we not engage law enforcement? The sheriffs are very upset in the state because they feel that our governor has not listened to them on their input on many different bills. This needs to stop. We need a true leader in Colorado. That's why I chose to accept Bob's offer to be his running mate as lieutenant governor. I care very deeply about this state. I care very deeply about people feeling safe in our communities, including myself, my children, and everyone else. We should all be able to function our communities feeling safe, not just from the potential crimes that someone new could commit, but to have our own government allow criminals out of jail prematurely without the treatment they need, or have the criminals get more rights than the victims. That's not right. It's not right at all. We need a strong leader that's going to stand up to this, and that's why I accepted running with Bob Beauprez, and I absolutely ask for everyone's vote on this issue. It's interesting to me that public safety and all the crazy things that have happened in the last 2 years related to many murders, we haven't been talking about it on this platform. It's time to talk about it. And Bob and I want to continue talking about it after November 4th when we're elected. Thank you very much.
Again, I appreciate you coming today, and public safety, I think, does need to be a topic of discussion in the public forum. I was thinking as Jill and George and Pete were speaking, where did I get my foundation, my belief, my set of principles? And certainly it was ingrained in me by my parents. That rule of law, those original 10 that were handed down, that guide us, Judeo-Christian principles that we were founded upon, but also a sense that there is some ultimate rights and wrongs that are out there. That came directly from my parents. They didn't have a problem deciding which was right and which was wrong, and if a little bit of punishment needed to be meted out, they were willing to do that as well. I think we need leadership that is willing to recognize that evil does exist, that people make serious mistakes, and that's what we have a rule of law for, and punishment that fits the crime. We've got a governor right now who seems to be more concerned about how criminals feel than about justice being served to the victims of crime and to the families of those victims of crime. It's time to right the ship. I wouldn't pretend that this is easy nor pleasant, but it's a necessary part of leadership. As I've said many times in other contexts, but also in this one, if John Hickenlooper isn't ready to lead, I am. Thanks for being here today, and I'll be glad to take some questions, or I'm sure George and Pete and Joe would be glad to take questions if indeed you have some. Sean?
Your latest ad.
Yes.
And just the words on the screen. It almost, well, critics have said it's a scare tactic, for one. And two, it almost suggests if you just read that somehow the governor is responsible for what Evan Eagle did. Is that the intention of the ad?
This isn't about one person. As serious as that was and as much notoriety as it obviously got, it's about a pattern, Sean. It's about a pattern that has gone on for too long in Colorado of violent criminals, some of them mentally unstable, some we know should not be released onto our streets, being released into our neighborhoods with nobody really knowing it. He cut his ankle bracelet off 4 days and nobody even went looking for him. That's wrong. By his own policy, at least at the time, that wasn't even considered a serious offense in Department of Corrections. Instead of really fixing the problem of people being returned to our streets from solitary confinement, what they've done in DOC is take people out of solitary, whether they were fit to be taken out of solitary or not, and put into a general prison population. And by Department of Corrections officials' own reports, what it did is make the total population worse, not somehow make those released from solitary better. But still, when they cross the line, this magic line of mandatory early release, they're turned out into general society, even if, as we've heard from the recent Denver Post reports, they've vowed to commit mass murder. They've vowed to blow up high schools. That's a frightening thing, I think, to the general public, and rightfully so. I mentioned earlier that people committed to our prison for sexual crimes of one kind or another, 93% of them received no therapy before they were released, and somehow magically they were supposed to get it on the outside and all would be well. Wishing and hoping is not a sentencing and parole policy, nor one of justice served for crimes committed. I think somewhere here common sense needs to prevail. And it seems that to me that the governor and his Department of Correction leadership right now is much more interested in a headline that suggests they've done something than in actually accomplishing something of real substance. It was mentioned the fact that Colorado is one of very few states, 4 or 5 as I recall, in the entire nation that doesn't have a felony DUI bill. Where was the governor in providing some leadership to get that done? A vehicular homicide mandatory sentencing bill. Where was his leadership on that? Where was he to at least listen to our sheriffs when they wanted to talk to him about real public safety improvement? And where was the governor when rightfully, after the Aurora Theater shootings, he said we've got to address mental health issues in Colorado, quickly rushed to sign a sole source contract, which rapidly evaporated after we spent a few $1 million, and nothing else has been done. Nothing else has been done. Substance at some point needs to carry the day, and that's my problem with the governor's record on public policy, is that there's no there.
Yes, there certainly are restrictions statutorily, but the governor can also lead in that area to take a look at when they are eligible for release. Right now, the statutes are fairly lenient with respect to the eligibility of those offenders to be considered for placement in a community corrections facility or a halfway house. This leads to a discussion about truth in sentencing. There's a deception going on with respect to what the public expects and what is actually happening as it relates to the sentences imposed and the time actually served. Without getting too much into the weeds, but for a violent offender, they serve maybe 50 to 70% of their time. They're parole eligible before they're parole eligible, but then they can apply for community corrections 6 months before that. For a nonviolent offender, they're parole eligible after serving about 35% of their time, and they can apply for community corrections 19 months before that. I was at a community corrections board meeting this morning. I sit on the one in Jefferson County. We had individuals that received 4, 5, and 6-year sentences from a judge, and we are mandated statutorily to consider them for placement after they've served 4, 5, or 6 months. I don't think that's what the public expects from our judiciary, from our system, and a leader can change those statutes to make it more in line with what the public expects.
Are we ready to spend more on prisons?
Sean, I don't know that the question really is one of keeping more people in prison, but it sure is about keeping the right people in prison. And that's what confounds people when they see these press reports and they see the evidence of the lax attention to crime that's happened, especially in the last 4 years, as both Pete and George have pointed out. You say, how can this happen? This doesn't feel like justice, and it sure doesn't feel like protecting the public safety. Let me give you a specific example, and you're probably familiar with this one. Even after the terrible tragedy, Evan Ebel, and you know the rest of the story, even after that terrible tragedy, some wondered, gee, maybe we failed in that 2011 bill that the governor signed that, yes, Director Clements supported, that relaxed the vesting for earned time while even in solitary confinement, even in solitary. And the House, some of the members are behind me now, the House on a very broad bipartisan basis passed reform legislation that would fix and address that problem so that there would, as Pete said, be a bit more truth in sentencing and some flexibility to keep people behind bars that shouldn't be out. Instead of leading on that and saying, get it to my desk, he let the Democrat leadership in the Senate send it to the Kill Committee, and of course that's exactly what happened. It was killed and it never saw the light of day, never saw the light of his office. That's not leadership. That's failed leadership. He loves to grab a headline, but when given an opportunity to fix something, he doesn't seem to show up for that one.
I have a follow-up for something Mr. Weir said, and then Mr. Beauprez wants to weigh in afterwards. I think you were referencing the direct file legislation that passed a couple of years ago when you talked about the internet and were able to charge juveniles with adult crimes. I believe that also was a bill that was passed with Republican support. I think one of the co-sponsors in the House was Republican. Do you think that that law should be repealed? And I guess the same question for Mr. Beauprez after you're done.
Absolutely. It is, it's bad public policy in my view. And I've got specific examples of what we warned individuals, legislators about, and frankly, what we warned Governor Hickenlooper about has come to pass. I've been a judge. I'm currently a prosecutor. Judges do not make filing decisions. They don't have the perspective to do it. It's not their job. We do it every day, and thousands of filing decisions are made by prosecutors. We do not take the decision of whether or not to charge a juvenile as an adult lightly. Other than the decision to seek the death penalty or not, there's no more important decision than whether or not to prosecute a juvenile as an adult. Because of this law, I can tell you, in my jurisdiction, we had a juvenile that murdered one individual and tried to kill 2 others. I announced that he deserved to be prosecuted as an adult. Prior to the passage of the law, that would have been it, and he would have been prosecuted as an adult. 11 months later, this matter got to hearing on whether or not he should in fact be prosecuted as an adult. Over 3,000 additional pages of investigative report, over 1,000 hours of lawyer time just by my office, 2 weeks worth of hearings came to the conclusion that, yes, he should be prosecuted as an adult. Finally, on this issue, I'm accountable to the public. I'm an elected official. If the public doesn't like a decision that I make in this area, they can vote me out of office. That's not what happens with judges. It is not a law that we supported. I believe it's a law that other statewide elected officials, current and previous elected officials, weighed in heavily and tried to convince Governor Hickenlooper to stop, but it fell on deaf ears.
A big difference, I think, in the way decisions get made is evidenced right here, and in what happened with our sheriffs relative to the gun bills. John Hickenlooper wouldn't even listen to the sheriffs. In this case, wouldn't listen to a district attorney like Pete Weir, and does seem to have a willingness to listen to a whole lot of other voices. Relative to an issue like you just brought up, Ivan, I would want to know what Pete Weir and George Brauchler, what their opinions were, because they're at the front line. And it's that listening on behalf of the citizens and talking to the people who really know and are on the front lines defending us and our public safety that I think is a critical difference in how one governor or the other might make a different decision. Thanks very much for coming. I appreciate it.